rocks, stars, atoms, and the invisible forces of nature. At just 5 years old, he was already reading science books written for adults. At 9, he was studying minerals and chemistry. At 12, he was writing letters to geologists and physicists, and they were shocked by his knowledge. His teacher said he had a mind like no other, but his classmates didn't understand him. He was awkward, quiet, and often lonely. He would speak in long, complicated sentences that confused other kids. He was bullied, isolated, but he didn't stop learning. He would walk alone in the park, thinking about the universe. While other children were thinking about toys, Robert was thinking about atoms, the smallest building blocks of life. He was not just a boy. He was a storm waiting to happen. By the time Robert entered Harvard University, he was only 18 years old, and he was already far beyond most of his professors. He studied physics, chemistry, philosophy, Sanskrit, Greek, literature, and art. He wasn't just a scientist. He was a poet, a philosopher, a thinker, a dreamer, and a deeply emotional man. But there was a dark side. Robert suffered from depression. He had breakdowns. He often felt like he didn't belong in this world. At one point, while studying in Cambridge, England, he became so unstable. He tried to poison his professor out of frustration. He was stopped. But the signs were clear. His mind was powerful, but it was dangerous. Eventually, Robert left England and moved to Germany to study under some of the world's greatest scientists like Max Born and Werner Heisenberg. There, he learned about the quantum world, the strange, invisible reality that lies beneath everything we see. Robert was fascinated. He wasn't just learning. He was dreaming of how to control atoms, the very building blocks of the universe. By the time he returned to America in the 1930s, he had become one of the most brilliant theoretical physicists in the world. He started teaching at UC Berkeley and Caltech, and soon his students called him a genius. But even then, nobody knew what was coming. Not even him. Meanwhile, far away in Germany, something evil was rising. Adolf Hitler had taken power. The world was on the edge of war again. And in 1938, German scientists made a discovery that would change everything. They had split the uranium atom. That single event, called nuclear fission, proved something terrifying. It was now possible to create a bomb so powerful, it could destroy entire cities in one strike. America panicked. What if Hitler got the bomb first? What if the Nazis used it to rule the world? So the US government started a top-secret project. It was called the Manhattan Project. Its mission, build an atomic bomb before the Nazis do. And they needed a leader, someone with vision, someone brilliant, someone who could see the invisible. That someone was Robert Oppenheimer. After the US government chose Robert Oppenheimer to lead the Manhattan Project, it wasn't just a job. It was a mission that would define the future of humanity. But there was a problem. Nobody had ever built an atomic bomb before. There were no instructions, no blueprints, no second chances. This was uncharted territory, and they needed to build everything from scratch. Scientists, labs, housing, equipment, all in complete secrecy. So Oppenheimer made a radical decision. Take them to the desert. He chose a remote, empty place in New Mexico called Los Alamos. Surrounded by mountains, dirt roads, no city, no reporters, no distractions. It was isolated, quiet, and perfect. In 1943, Oppenheimer and a small group of top scientists moved to Los Alamos. Within months, that empty desert became a living, breathing scientific city. Houses were built, labs were created, security fences were put up. Soldiers guarded every road. Even the workers and families living there didn't know what they were building. Everyone had a number instead of a name. Letters were censored. Phone calls were monitored. If someone asked, people would say, "We're just working on government research." In reality, they were building the most powerful weapon ever imagined. Oppenheimer handpicked some of the smartest scientists in the world: Enrico Fermi, who had built the first nuclear reactor; Niels Bohr, the Danish physicist who helped develop quantum theory; Richard Feynman, a young genius with a wild mind; Edward Teller, who later designed the hydrogen bomb. More than 6,000 people were eventually working at Los Alamos, including wives, children, cooks, janitors, and engineers. And in the middle of it all was Oppenheimer, a man who had never run a lab before, a man with no experience leading a massive project. But somehow he made it work. How? Because he inspired people. He wasn't just a scientist, he was a leader, a philosopher, a visionary, and a deeply emotional man. He would walk into the labs wearing a black hat and smoking a pipe, talking about science and poetry in the same breath. He quoted the Bhagavad Gita, Shakespeare, and Einstein. He didn't just talk formulas. He talked about what this bomb meant for humanity. Even the military officers respected him. Despite his thin body, soft voice, and strange personality, they called him the father of the bomb. While the labs were working day and night, Oppenheimer pushed everyone harder. He knew the Nazis were also working on a nuclear bomb. Every hour of delay could mean the enemy would win. So they worked like machines, splitting atoms, calculating reactions, designing the bomb's core, figuring out how to make it small enough to drop from a plane, but big enough to destroy a city. It was the most complex scientific problem ever attempted in human history, and it was all done by hand. No computers, only chalkboards, notebooks, and human minds. They had to invent new materials, solve problems that had never existed before. Even a small mistake could cause the entire bomb to fail, or kill the people working on it. The secrecy was extreme. Workers couldn't tell their families what they were doing. Wives didn't know what their husbands were building. Children were playing near labs that held weapons of mass destruction. Every scientist had a security clearance, and even a whisper of communism in their past could get them fired. FBI agents watched everything. The government feared spies, and with good reason. Later, it was discovered that Soviet spies had infiltrated the Manhattan Project. But at the time, nobody knew. All they knew was, we must finish the bomb, before the enemy does. As the bomb got closer to completion, something strange happened inside the minds of the scientists. They weren't just excited anymore, they were afraid. They began asking questions like, what if this bomb starts a chain reaction and burns the Earth's atmosphere? Oppenheimer had the same fears. He couldn't sleep. He walked alone at night staring at the stars. He once said to a colleague, in some strange way, I feel like I've already died, and what we are doing here is something the world will never forgive. But still, he kept going, because if he didn't do it, someone else would. If America didn't build it, Hitler might. So they pushed forward. By 1945, the bomb was almost ready. Now, it was time to test it. A location was chosen, the Jornada del Muerto Desert in New Mexico. It means Journey of the Dead Man. It was dry, empty, desolate. The perfect place to set off an explosion the world had never seen. The test was given a name, Trinity. The bomb was placed on a tall metal tower 100 feet high. Scientists built bunkers miles away. Cameras were placed, instruments set, warnings issued, and on July 16, 1945, before dawn, the world changed. The night before the test, July 15, 1945, the desert air was heavy with silence. At Los Alamos, the scientists didn't sleep. Some were checking calculations for the 100th time. Others sat in bunkers, staring at the sky. Even Oppenheimer was quiet. He had always been a man of many thoughts, quoting poetry, whispering science. But that night, he stood in stillness, hands in his pockets, looking at the tower they had built. A tower that now held a new sun, ready to be born. The scientists had done their best. But still, they didn't know what would happen. Some feared the blast might ignite the sky and destroy the entire planet. Others thought it might just fizzle out and fail. But most of all, they feared what would happen if it worked. The test was scheduled for 4 a.m., but a storm rolled in. Wind, lightning, thunder. The countdown was delayed. Oppenheimer stood on a metal observation platform 10 miles away with a few others. He barely blinked. His heart was beating. But his mind was somewhere else. He later said he remembered lines from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. If the radiance of 1,000 suns were to burst at once into the sky, it would be like the splendor of the Mighty One. At exactly 5:29:45 a.m. on July 16, 1945, the world changed. The desert was silent, for a moment. Then came the flash. A light brighter than anything ever seen on Earth. So bright, men saw the bones in their hands through their skin. So bright, it turned night into day. Then came the fireball, a monstrous sphere of heat, color, and death rising into the sky. And then, the shockwave. A sound like the sky had been torn apart. Windows shattered. Sand melted into glass. A mushroom cloud climbed over 7 miles high. The Earth stood still. The scientists stared, speechless. Some cheered, some cried, some collapsed in silence, unable to believe what they had done. But Oppenheimer said nothing. He simply whispered, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." These words were not just dramatic. They were deeply personal. They came from a 2,000-year-old scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, which Oppenheimer had studied for years. It was the moment when a warrior accepts his duty to fight, even if it brings destruction. And that's what Oppenheimer had become. Not a scientist, not a father, but a man who had opened the gates of destruction and could never close them again. After the explosion, many scientists felt proud. They had solved the unsolvable, but others were horrified. They realized this was not just a weapon. This was a new age, a nuclear age, where humans could destroy themselves in minutes. One scientist, Kenneth Bainbridge, said to Oppenheimer after the test, "Now we are all sons of B-Yes." It was a half joke, but behind it was truth. They had done something that could never be undone. As Trinity shook the desert across the ocean, World War II was still burning. Germany had surrendered in May, but Japan was still fighting. The US government had to decide, should we use the bomb, the real bomb, on human beings? Or should we warn Japan, show the power, and ask for peace? The decision was not Oppenheimer's to make, but he was called to Washington to speak with President Harry Truman's advisors. He didn't resist. In fact, Oppenheimer believed that using the bomb once, just once, might save lives by ending the war quickly. He said, "In some ways, we feel that we have blood on our hands, but we also feel that if we don't use it, the war might continue and kill millions more." But he underestimated thousands more were burned, blinded, or crushed. 3 days later, on August 9th, another bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Another 40,000 people died in moments. Survivors were left with and radiation sickness. Oppenheimer didn't drop the bomb, but he had built it. And when he heard what happened, he broke inside. He realized this was not just the end of the war. This was the end of innocence, the end of science being only for good. A few weeks later, Oppenheimer was invited to meet President Truman. He walked into the White House, thin, tired, deeply shaken. Truman was smiling. The war was over. But Oppenheimer looked down and said, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman was stunned. He later told his aides, "I never want to see that crybaby in my office again." From that moment, Oppenheimer knew. Part 2. The Fall of the Father. How America Destroyed Oppenheimer. The world was celebrating. In August 1945, after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, World War II officially ended. America was there was only silence. He didn't want medals. He didn't want parades. He didn't even want to be thanked. Because he couldn't forget the photos. Burned bodies, melted faces, children screaming, cities turned to ash. His invention had worked. But it had worked too well. Oppenheimer returned to Los Alamos after the war, but he was not the same man. He avoided people. He spoke less. He lost weight. He was haunted by one question. What have I done? At night he had nightmares. He would wake up sweating, dreaming of bombs falling from the sky. Sometimes he would stare out the window for hours, not saying a word, just remembering. He knew the war was won, but at what cost? He once said, "In some crude sense, which no vulgarity can express, the physicists have known sin, and this is a knowledge which they cannot lose." This was not science anymore. It was spiritual pain. Instead of continuing to build bigger bombs, Oppenheimer began doing something unexpected. He started speaking against nuclear weapons. He gave public talks. He warned political leaders. He wrote letters to stop the spread of atomic bombs. He believed that what happened in Japan should never happen again. He believed that science should be used for understanding, not for destruction. He met with President Truman's advisors and asked for international control of nuclear weapons, a global agreement to prevent more bomb making. But the timing was terrible, because America was no longer just fighting wars with guns. In the late 1940s, a new fear began to rise: the Soviet Union. The US had used the atomic bomb first, but now the Soviets were working on their own bomb. The Cold War had started, a war of secrets, spies, and power. America wanted more bombs, bigger bombs, stronger bombs. They wanted something called the hydrogen bomb, a bomb 1,000 times more powerful than the one dropped on Hiroshima. Oppenheimer refused. He said it was a weapon of genocide, and he did not want to be part of it. He believed that building more bombs would lead to mutual destruction, that it would start an arms race no one could stop. But his refusal made powerful people angry. People in the US government began to whisper, "Why is Oppenheimer against the hydrogen bomb? Why is he meeting with foreign scientists? Didn't he have communist friends in the past?" You see, back in the 1930s, Oppenheimer had attended left-wing meetings. His wife, Catherine, Kitty, had once been a Communist Party member. His brother, Frank, had also been politically active. Back then, these things didn't matter much. But now, during the Cold War, they became dangerous. The US government was paranoid. They feared spies. They feared Soviet influence. They even feared their own citizens. And so they began looking at Oppenheimer not as a hero, but as a potential traitor. In 1954, it all exploded. Oppenheimer was called to a secret hearing by the US Atomic Energy Commission, AEC. He was accused of delaying the hydrogen bomb, having communist connections, being a security risk. It wasn't a fair trial. He wasn't allowed to have a lawyer inside the room. His private conversations were used against him. Old friends were forced to testify. Even his loyalty to America was questioned. Oppenheimer tried to defend himself with logic, honesty, and calm words. But they didn't want truth. They wanted to silence him. The hearing lasted 4 weeks. Oppenheimer, once the most respected scientist in America, was now interrogated like a criminal. Every detail of his life was opened. His past relationships, his family, his beliefs, even old letters from 20 years ago. His name, once connected with genius, was now being dragged through the mud. On June 29, 1954, the AEC made its decision. Oppenheimer's security clearance was revoked. That meant he could no longer access government secrets. He could no longer work on atomic projects. He was officially cut off from the world he had helped create. It was a brutal fall from greatness. Oppenheimer was crushed. He didn't scream. He didn't protest. He simply walked out. Quietly. He returned to Princeton, where he gave lectures and continued to write. But something inside him had died. The man who gave America the bomb, the man who had helped win the war, was now treated as an enemy. His friends tried to support him, but the pain was too deep. Even his family felt the sadness. His wife, Kitty, drank heavily. Their home life became cold, quiet, and distant. He once said to a friend, "When you see something that is technically sweet, you go ahead and do it." And that's what we did. We had the theory, the materials, the chance. We built it. And then, we realized the consequences. Part 3. The Invisible Man. When a genius is left alone with his regret. After losing his security clearance, Oppenheimer was no longer useful to the country he once served. He was not arrested. He was not put in jail. But he was treated as if he didn't exist. No more government meetings. No more invitations to scientific conferences. No more role in shaping America's future. He was simply cut off. From being the face of atomic power, he became a ghost in his own country. Oppenheimer moved to a quiet house in Princeton, New Jersey, with his wife Kitty and their 2 children, Peter and Tony. But this was not a happy home. He tried to continue his work by writing papers, giving lectures, and thinking deeply about physics, philosophy, and humanity. But inside, he was breaking. He would spend hours sitting near the window, watching the trees move in silence. Sometimes he'd smoke his pipe and stare at nothing. His once brilliant voice became quiet, his sharp mind now filled with doubts. He had given the world a weapon that could end it. But no one wanted to hear what he had to say after that. Oppenheimer's pain didn't just live inside him. It spread to his family. His wife, Kitty, became more and more angry and bitter. She felt the world had stolen her husband. She started drinking heavily and pushing people away. Their daughter, Tony, was intelligent like her father, but emotionally fragile. She struggled with depression and later in life, took her own life. A tragedy that broke the Oppenheimer family even further. Their son, Peter, grew up with the weight of his father's silence and genius, but kept a distance from the spotlight. This was not a house of joy. It was a house of quiet pain. A house full of books, memories, and regret. Even though the world turned its back on him, Oppenheimer never stopped thinking. He gave lectures at universities, mostly about science and ethics. He warned people, again and again, about the dangers of nuclear weapons. But now, nobody listened like they used to. The same people who once praised him now saw him as a man from the past. One newspaper called him the man who opened the door to the atomic age, and then got lost in it. Oppenheimer often quoted the Bhagavad Gita in his speeches, the same scripture he had quoted after Trinity. He once said, "In battle, in the forest, at the precipice in the mountains, on the dark great sea, in the midst of javelins and arrows, in sleep, in confusion, in the depths of shame, the good deeds a man has done before defend him." These were not just poetic words. They were the quiet prayers of a man trying to forgive himself. While Oppenheimer lived in quiet exile, the world kept changing. The Soviet Union built its own atomic bombs. The hydrogen bomb was developed, the very bomb Oppenheimer had opposed. Countries around the world joined the nuclear arms race. America became more powerful, but also more afraid. Nuclear weapons were no longer a secret. They were becoming a normal part of global politics. Oppenheimer watched this unfold with sadness. He once said, "In trying to defend freedom, we may have helped create a world where fear rules more than freedom." The very thing he had helped build to end a war was now being used to threaten peace. Oppenheimer was always more than a scientist. He was a philosopher, a humanist, a man who thought about the meaning of life. But modern science was now focused on power, money, and speed. He began to feel that the true purpose of science, to understand nature and improve humanity, was being lost. He told students, "The physicists have known sin, and we must not forget that." He wasn't trying to be dramatic. He was trying to remind them that science without ethics is dangerous. In his later years, Oppenheimer often traveled to a small island called St. John, in the Caribbean. There, he found a small sense of peace. He would walk along the beach, sit under trees, watch the sea, and think in silence. No one called him death there. No one judged him. He was just Robert, a tired man with a brilliant mind and a heavy heart. He still gave lectures sometimes, but less and less. Each year, he became quieter, thinner, slower, as if the weight of the bomb, was still pressing down on him. In public, he was polite, calm, gentle. But behind his eyes was a lifetime of thoughts no one else could fully understand. He had seen the beginning of a new age, and watched it become a nightmare. He had given humanity the power of gods, and was now paying the price of that creation. He never begged for forgiveness. He never called himself a victim, but the world could see the pain in his silence. Oppenheimer was not just a man. He had become a symbol of how far the human mind can go, and how far the heart can fall when there are no limits. Part 4. The Man Who Became a Warning. The Final Days of J. Robert Oppenheimer. By the early 1960s, Oppenheimer had become quiet, thinner, and weaker. He had stopped traveling as much. He rarely gave public speeches. He spent more time alone, by the sea, or in his study, surrounded by books and silence. But inside his body, another battle had begun. In 1965, doctors diagnosed him with throat cancer, likely caused by decades of heavy smoking. He had smoked his pipe almost every day since he was a young man. Now it was taking everything from him: his voice, his strength, his life. He began to lose weight rapidly. He couldn't eat without pain. Speaking became difficult. The man whose words once shook the world was now slowly losing his ability to speak at all. He underwent radiation treatments and chemotherapy, but his condition worsened. He stayed mostly at his home in Princeton, cared for by doctors, his wife Kitty, and a few close friends. But he didn't complain. He didn't cry out. He endured, just like he had endured betrayal, shame, and regret. In private, he read books, mostly philosophy, poetry, and the Bhagavad Gita, the same book that had once helped him find meaning in destruction. When visitors came, he smiled gently. But behind that smile was a man who had seen too much, lost too much, and lived too long with a burden too heavy to carry. In 1963, 2 years before his cancer was discovered, something unexpected happened. The US government, after almost a decade of silence, decided to give Oppenheimer a small honor: the Enrico Fermi Award, one of the highest scientific awards in the country. President Lyndon B. Johnson approved it. It was supposed to be a way of saying, "We're sorry, we were wrong, you deserved better." But Oppenheimer knew what this was. It was not justice. It was not forgiveness. It was a political apology, offered too late after everything had been taken from him. Still, he accepted the award. He stood on the stage, thin and weak, wearing a black suit and soft smile. He gave a short speech, just a few words, polite, thoughtful, but not emotional. Inside, he knew, they cannot return what they destroyed in me. In early 1967, the cancer spread. He could no longer walk without help. His voice became almost a whisper. His wife, Kitty, rarely left his side. Friends came to visit him, old colleagues, students, even some of the very people who had once testified against him. He never shouted at them. He didn't show anger. He simply welcomed them with kindness. Because in the end, he wasn't trying to punish anyone. He was trying to understand what it all meant: the bomb, the war, the betrayal, the silence. He once whispered to a friend, "When I look back, I see a chain of choices. Each one made sense at the time, but taken together, they led to something I did not choose." That was Oppenheimer, a man trapped inside a legacy he no longer controlled. On February 18, 1967, at the age of 62, J. Robert Oppenheimer died in his home. There were no headlines, no sirens, no crowds in the streets. Only silence. The man who had once brought fire to Earth died quietly, in a small house, surrounded by a few people and a mountain of forgotten memories. No atomic scientist had ever fallen from such a height. No genius had ever paid a price so heavy for doing what he thought was necessary. After his death, many scientists, historians, and leaders began to rethink his legacy. Some called him a hero. Some called him a tragedy. Some called him a monster. But most called him a warning. Today, his name is remembered in history books, movies, and science. But it is not remembered with celebration. It is remembered with a question. Just because we can do something, should we? That is the question Oppenheimer's life left behind. A question that still lives with every nuclear weapon in the world. Let me now give you the deepest and most powerful lessons from Oppenheimer's life, so you never forget what this story truly means. 1. Intelligence without conscience is dangerous. Oppenheimer was one of the smartest people in the world. But even he admitted, we didn't think enough about the consequences. Being smart is not enough. You must also be wise. You must also be kind. Because without a heart, your brain can build destruction. 2. Even the most powerful feel regret. He built the bomb, he changed history. But it did not bring him peace. Fame is not peace. Power is not joy. Only a clear soul can give you real happiness. 3. Don't let the world use you and throw you away. Oppenheimer gave everything for his country. But when they were done with him, they turned their back on him. You must be careful. Never sacrifice your entire self for a system that doesn't value your humanity. 4. Silence is the loudest scream. He never fought back with anger. But his silence said everything. Sometimes the deepest truths are not spoken. They are felt. And Oppenheimer's silence became a symbol for every scientist, leader, and dreamer who realizes they went too far. 5. You can't undo what you create. So create carefully. The atomic bomb cannot be unmade. The destruction cannot be reversed. What you build today might change the future forever. So ask yourself every day, am I building something that will help people or hurt them? Oppenheimer's story is not just a history lesson. It is a mirror for all of us. It shows what happens when intelligence moves faster than morality. It shows how a single man can change the world and then suffer alone for it. It shows how a soul can be brilliant and broken at the same time. We must never forget what he gave us, and we must never forget what it cost him. If you felt this story, if this story touched your heart, if you learned something powerful, if you now see the world differently, then don't just forget it. Remember Oppenheimer. Remember what he built, and remember what he lost. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to this channel, because here, we don't just tell stories. We tell the truths that the world tries to forget, truths that make you feel, think, and grow. Thank you for watching, and may you never use your intelligence without compassion. God bless you, and never stop learning.
Been there? She asked. Evelyn paused. Who are you looking for? The woman said Edward's full name without hesitation. Her tone was calm, as if she was speaking about something completely normal. Evelyn felt her stomach twist. She had never gone through his things before, but the call had changed something inside her. She picked it up. The screen lit up with unread messages. At first, she only saw names she didn't recognize. Then she opened one. Her breath caught. The message was from a woman named Lena. It read, "The kids miss you. When will you come over?" Another message followed. "Don't forget, we need to talk about school fees. Love you." Evelyn's hands trembled. She opened more messages. They spoke of birthdays, doctor visits, and plans for the weekend. There were photos, too. Edward smiling with two small children, a boy and a girl. Her throat tightened. She put the phone back exactly where it was. She didn't want him to know she had seen it. She wanted to see the whole truth before she confronted him. That evening, Edward came home late. He gave her a quick kiss on the cheek and sat down for dinner as if nothing had changed. Evelyn watched him closely. He was calm, too calm. She barely heard his words. All she could think about was the woman on the phone, the name in the messages, and the children in those photos. When he went to bed, she sat alone at the table. She thought about their life together, the years of shared memories, the struggles, the love she had believed in. She remembered how he had held her hand when their first child was born, how he had stayed up with her when she was sick. Now she wondered if any of it had been real. She didn't cry. She couldn't. The shock was too deep. But something inside her shifted. The trust she had carried for decades now felt fragile, ready to break. She whispered to herself, I will know everything. From that moment, she made a silent promise. She would not accuse him yet. She would not show anger. She would wait. She would watch. And when the time came, she would have every answer she needed. The call had changed everything. Not because of what was said, but because Evelyn now understood there were parts of Edward's life she had never seen. And she was ready to uncover them all. Chapter 2. Messages from Another Life. Evelyn stood in the kitchen, staring at Edward's phone. Her heart was beating fast. Her mind told her to leave it alone. Her hands told her to pick it up. She reached for it. The screen lit up with a list of unread messages. Some were from names she knew. Others were from numbers she had never seen before. One name caught her eye. Lena. She opened the conversation. The first message read, The kids are asking about you. When will you come over? The second read, Don't forget the school fees. Love you. Her hands shook. She scrolled up and saw more. Messages about birthdays, about family dinners, about weekends spent together. She saw photos. Edward smiling with two children she had never seen before. The boy looked about 7. The girl maybe 5. In one photo, Edward was holding the girl in his arms, kissing her cheek. Evelyn felt something break inside her. She wanted to throw the phone across the room. She wanted to scream, but she didn't. Instead, she put the phone back exactly where it had been. She wanted him to think nothing had happened. She needed more answers before she said a single word to him. That evening, Edward came home late. He kissed her cheek quickly, sat at the table, and spoke about his day. Evelyn nodded, saying very little. She kept her eyes on him, wondering how easily he could hide so much. When he went to bed, Evelyn stayed in the living room. She thought about every year they had shared. She remembered the times he had been away for business trips. She remembered the phone calls he had taken in another room. She remembered how he never liked her to ask too many questions about his work. It all began to fit together. For the next few days, Evelyn watched him closely. She listened to the way he spoke on the phone. Sometimes his voice softened, almost like a different man. Sometimes he smiled at his screen in a way he never smiled at her anymore. One afternoon, while Edward was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the table. Evelyn didn't touch it this time. She only looked at the screen. It was Lena again. The message read, We miss you. When can we see you? Evelyn. She promised herself she would uncover every part of it, not with anger, not with shouting, but with quiet patience. She would know exactly who Edward really was before she decided what to do. For the first time in 50 years, Evelyn felt more alone than she had ever been. But she also felt something else, a quiet determination growing inside her. The truth was out there, and she would find it. Chapter 3. Following the Truth. Evelyn could not forget what she had seen in Edward's phone. The words, the photos, the way those children looked at him as if he belonged to them. She carried it in her mind every hour. She spoke to no one. She acted as if life was normal. But inside, she was restless. The messages had given her names. The photos had given her faces. She needed to see the truth with her own eyes. She needed to know if the woman in the messages was the same voice she had heard on the phone that day. 3 days later, Edward told her he had to go out for a meeting. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. This was her chance. She waited for him to leave. She picked up her bag and followed. She kept her distance, her heart pounding. Edward drove across the city. He stopped outside a small house. Evelyn parked far enough not to be seen. She watched as he walked to the door. The moment it opened, a young woman stepped out. Her hair was tied back. She smiled when she saw him. The smile was warm, familiar, like they had shared it 100 times before. Then the door opened wider, and 3 children ran toward him. They hugged him as if they had been waiting all day. He bent down and kissed them. Evelyn felt her stomach twist. This was not a stranger being kind to children. This was a father greeting his own. The woman, Lena, touched his arm and said something Evelyn couldn't hear. Edward smiled and followed her inside. The door closed. Evelyn sat in her car for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't move. She just stared at the closed door, her mind racing. She had imagined it before, but seeing it was different. This was real. This was her husband, living a life she knew nothing about. On the way home, she tried to remember every detail. The children's faces, their ages, the way they held on to him. She thought of her own children and how they would feel if they knew. When Edward came home that evening, he was calm. He told her the meeting had gone well. She nodded and asked no questions. Inside, her anger burned quietly. That night, as he slept, Evelyn lay awake. She could hear his steady breathing beside her. She wondered how many nights he had come home from them to her bed. How many times had he kissed her goodnight after kissing that other woman goodbye? The next morning, she made a decision. She would not confront him yet. She needed more proof, more answers. She wanted to know how far this life went, how long it had been. Who else knew? She began to pay attention to everything, his schedule, his phone calls, his excuses. Sometimes she noticed him smiling at a message and quickly putting his phone away. Sometimes he came home later than usual, saying traffic was bad. She said nothing, but she wrote it all down in a small notebook she kept hidden. One evening, Edward mentioned he had to travel for a few days for work. Evelyn agreed without hesitation, but in her mind, she was already making a plan. She would follow him again. This time, she would go further. The day he left, she waited an hour before starting her car. She kept far enough behind so he wouldn't notice. He drove out of the city and into a town she didn't recognize. He stopped at a building she couldn't see clearly from the road. He stayed there for over an hour. When he came out, he was laughing with two men she had never seen before. She didn't know who they were, but she would find out. When she returned home, she opened her notebook and wrote everything: the times, the places, the faces. The pages were filling fast. Evelyn looked at her notes that night and whispered to herself, "One day, you will not be able to hide." She knew the road ahead would be painful, but she had started down it, and there was no turning back. Chapter 4. Hidden Papers, Hidden Life. Evelyn's notebook was now half filled. Names, dates, times, places. Every entry was a piece of the puzzle. But she still didn't know the whole story. She had seen the other family. She had followed him to that unknown town. Yet she felt there was more. Much more. One morning, Edward left for work earlier than usual. Evelyn waited until she heard his car pull away. Then she went to the small study where he kept his desk. She had never searched it before. She opened the drawers slowly, listening for any sound from outside. The first drawer held nothing unusual: pens, papers, old receipts. But the second drawer was locked. She searched the room for a key and found one taped under the desk. Her hands shook as she unlocked it. Inside were several thick folders. She pulled them out and began to read. The first folder was filled with bank statements. The amounts were huge. Some accounts had over $100,000. None of these accounts were in the name Edward Miller. They were under a different name, James Ward. The second folder had business registration papers. The company name was unfamiliar. It claimed to sell investment packages. Evelyn felt her stomach turn. She remembered the man she had seen Edward laughing with in that strange town. At the bottom of the drawer, she found a small envelope. Inside were photographs. Not of her, not of their children. These were photos of Edward with other people, men in expensive suits and women she didn't know. In one photo, he was holding a glass of alcohol, smiling with his arm around a man who looked like trouble. She felt her chest tighten. She had never seen Edward drink, at least not in front of her. She gathered the papers and read more carefully. The business documents listed meetings in different states. The addresses were written in his handwriting. She also saw contracts signed under the name James Ward. The deals involved large amounts of money but no clear product or service. Evelyn understood what it meant. These were scams. People gave money, expecting returns, and Edward, or James, kept it. Her hands went cold. She placed everything back exactly where it had been. She locked the drawer and returned the key. She wanted him to believe nothing had been touched. That evening, Edward came home cheerful. He told her about a new client and how business was going well. Evelyn smiled faintly, hiding the storm inside her. Later, when he had gone to bed, she opened her notebook. She wrote down every detail: the names on the bank accounts, the company name, The false identity, the hidden photographs. As she closed the notebook, she realized the man she had shared a life with was not just unfaithful. He was living a double life in every sense. He had another family, another name, another business, and another face he showed the world. Evelyn sat still for a long time. She felt anger, sadness, and betrayal mixing together. But she also felt something else: control. She was holding the truth now, and she was not going to let it go. She whispered to herself, "One day, I will decide how this ends." Chapter 5. The Business of Lies. Evelyn could no longer look at Edward the same way. Every smile, every word, felt like a cover for something darker. The bank accounts, the false name, the strange business. It was all still in her head, playing like a film she didn't want to watch. She had to know more about the company. One morning, when Edward was in the shower, she took the business card she had found in his locked drawer. The phone number was printed clearly. She dialed it, keeping her voice steady. A man answered. "Ward Investments, how can I help you?" Evelyn spoke carefully. "I'm interested in your investment packages. Could you tell me how it works?" The man explained quickly. "You give us a set amount, and we double it in 3 months. No risks, guaranteed." It sounded too good to be true. She asked, "And who runs this?" The man replied, "Mr. James Ward." Evelyn's heart pounded. She was speaking to someone who worked for her husband, or rather, the man her husband became when he left home. The man lowered his voice. "If you're serious about investing, I can send you a private offer. But between you and me, not everyone gets their money back. So, think carefully." He hung up. Evelyn sat holding the phone, her hands cold. This was not just dishonest. It was dangerous. Edward wasn't simply lying to her. He was scamming strangers, taking their money, ruining lives. That night, she watched him as he laughed over dinner. She wondered how many people had cried because of him. She wondered if they knew where he lived, if they knew about her. She wanted to scream, but she didn't. She smiled, spoke softly, and hid the storm inside. She added the phone call to her notebook, writing every detail, even the man's warning. The truth was becoming heavier, but she was not ready to drop it yet. Chapter 6. Friends Who Know Too Much. Evelyn knew there were people in Edward's life who might know more. Old friends, business partners, men who had been around before she started noticing the changes. She decided to find one of them. There was a man named Carl. He had been Edward's friend for decades. She remembered him visiting their house years ago, but he had stopped coming in recent times. She called him, pretending she wanted to surprise Edward for his birthday. Carl agreed to meet her for coffee. When they sat down, she smiled politely. "I wanted to ask you, has Edward been okay lately? He's been so busy." Carl hesitated. He looked down at his cup. Then he sighed. "Evelyn, I don't know how much you want to hear." She held his gaze, all of it. Carl's voice lowered. "Edward has been into things for years. Things you wouldn't approve of. I kept my distance when I realized it was getting worse. He drinks a lot when he's away from home. He spends time with women. And the business? It's not clean. People lose money. A lot of money." Evelyn's chest felt heavy, but she kept her face still. "For how long?" Carl shook his head. "Longer than you think. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I thought you knew." She didn't reply. She simply nodded, thanked him for meeting her, and left. Walking away, she realized something painful. She had been the only one in the dark. Others had seen the truth. They had stayed silent. She had been living in a life that was never what it seemed. That evening, when Edward came home, she greeted him with the same calm voice. He told her about a business meeting he had attended. She smiled and listened. She didn't mention Carl. She didn't mention the drinking. She didn't mention the women. Later, in the quiet of the night, she opened her notebook again. She wrote down Carl's words exactly as she remembered them. Every truth she collected felt like a cut, but she refused to close the wound until she had every piece of the story. She looked at the filled pages, her pen resting at the edge of the paper. She whispered, "You think I don't know. But one day, you will see exactly how much I know." Chapter 7. The Book of Secrets. Evelyn opened her notebook and ran her finger down the first page. She read the old lines slowly. The first call, the messages from Lena, the photos of 2 children with Edward, the other address, the bank accounts under the name James Ward, the fake company, the warning on the phone, Carl's confession about alcohol, other women, and lost money. It was all written there. It felt heavy. It also felt clear. She was not lost anymore. She was not guessing anymore. She knew what she had seen. She knew what she had heard. She knew what she could prove. She turned to a fresh page and wrote a title. What I still need to know. Then she listed questions in simple words. How long has this been? How much money is hidden? Where is the money kept? How many people lost money? Who helps him? Who knows? Are there more children? Does Lena know about me? Does anyone else know about me? She stared at the list and felt a slow fire in her chest. Not rage. Focus. She wanted answers. She wanted them one by one. She wanted them in order. She would not shout. She would not rush. She would gather facts. She would build a straight line that could not be bent. She wrote another title. What I Will Do. The plan was simple. Watch the routine. Track the dates. Listen for names. Keep copies of key things. Protect her own accounts. Speak last, not first. Ask short questions. Demand short answers. Do not argue. Do not explain. Read from the book. Let the facts talk. She wrote those rules in small, neat letters. Then she read them out loud, softly, so her heart would remember them. For the next days, she watched every small move. Edward laughed more on some days. He went silent on others. He checked his phone at the same times. He left the house with the same words. He returned with the same smile. He avoided eye contact when certain names showed up. He changed the subject when money came up. He